everyone, to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions. This is offered to you by Stella Moving Center every Saturday afternoon. And it is an opportunity for folks to get together and engage in meaningful conversation on topics that come from our Stella Moving Center Almanac. And this idea of conscious endeavor seems particularly relevant today when we are having the opportunity to take up the conversation on motion and consciousness. We're really fortunate to have with us today, actually not one, but it turns out two Feldenkrais teachers. And the one who's going to be presenting today is Alice Boyd. She's recently joined us as a teacher here at Stella Moving Center and is very interested, in fact, in taking it farther by creating a film on his life. So she's really seen so much value to his work, and I know that through her presentation today, we're going to understand a little bit more about the freedom and the human dignity that Moshe Feldenkrais's work has brought and how that's related to motion and consciousness.
Great. I just wanted to take a moment briefly and say I was just looking at Thich Nhat Hanh apparently not that long ago spoke to how the next Buddha is the Sangha, how coming together like this in conscious sort of with the intention of really connecting consciously and learning from our deeper intelligence and wisdom is profoundly important. So deep bow to you, Renee, for doing this weekly and for collecting such an extraordinary group of wise beings. And I'm involved in several groups, and it really feels like there's such a potency these days as things intensify in the world to really tap into the wisdom that's in and among us. So thank you for this. And yeah, I'd love to. I'm most of you have probably experienced quite a lot of Feldenkrais, but I thought it might be nice to just start with a quick little lesson that helps give that sense of neuroplasticity and how we can so quickly affect change in our movement with some attention and awareness. So come on up to stand, and I don't have to see you, you don't have to see me, have some space around you, but make sure you can still hear me. And just stand. In a movement class, there's often this, I don't know, I have a dance background, so there's almost always this moment of, ooh, stand correctly, and let that go as much as possible, and just stand, let your arms hang by your sides. If you happen to have shoes on, I hope none of you have shoes on, but if you do, if it's easy to kick them off, kick them off. And just notice yourself in standing. If it's comfortable to close your eyes, close your eyes. That helps turn your attention more inwards. You can sense yourself a little more clearly. And in Feldenkrais, we're interested in noticing our habits and patterns. So if you happen to notice maybe you hold your weight a little more on one foot and leg than the other, watch the impulse to try to correct that, and instead just appreciate what you're noticing. Notice your breathing here as you're noticing yourself. Sometimes when we start to attend to ourselves closely, the breath can get really shallow. So as much as possible, an easy, comfortable breathing. And sense if there are any distinct differences between your left and right sides. Again, maybe a sense that you have your weight more on one foot and leg than the other, or one side of you just feels more present somehow, bigger, more obvious to you, perhaps. And then open your eyes and keep your feet basically where they are, and just turn to look behind you and then come back. And pause once you've come back to the center, and notice which direction you turn to look behind you, and go that same way, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 times. Turn to look behind you and come back. And Feldenkrais is not about stretching or seeing how far you can go. It's really just feeling into just this easy, simple movement, like someone behind you called your name and you want to turn to look behind you and see how far you go easily, comfortably, and what parts of you participate or don't. Again, not to fix anything, just to notice. And the next time you're facing forward, pause. Notice if just from turning a few times to one side, already something feels a little different as you stand here in the center. And then turn to look the other way behind you and notice why you chose to go the first way first. Maybe there's something a little less organized, a little less sort of familiar. This just doesn't feel like you somehow, perhaps. And the next time you're turned this second way to look behind you, stay there. So turn just an amount that's really easy and comfortable. You could stay here, you can breathe. Notice where you're looking, pick a spot on the wall to sort of mark that spot. And then keep everything turned like this and just slowly turn your eyes back toward the front and then back in the direction that you're looking. So your head stays, your shoulders stay, your pelvis stay, your feet and legs stay, just your eyes turning back as though you wanted to look forward and then back to where you were looking. And see if you can make this movement of your eyes even and continuous and smooth without holding your breath. Again, watch that impulse to get sort of stiff, let your shoulders relax. And the next time your eyes are looking in the direction your head is turned, pause. And a couple of times, let your head turn with your eyes back to the front. See if you can keep your shoulders where they are, your pelvis where they are. And again, not to stretch or see how far you can go, but can you evenly, smoothly turn your head a little back to the front and then back in the direction that you're turned. Nice. Good. And when your head is turned this next time in the direction you're turned, stay there. Can you turn just your shoulders a little tiny bit back to the front and back in the direction that you're turned? And what does that mean? One shoulder goes a little forward, the other goes a little back. And again, let it be really small, really subtle, rather than sort of stretching anything or finding the end range of motion. You're seeing if you can make it even, smooth, simple. Pause the next time you're turned all the way. Let your knees soften a little bit. And can you turn just your pelvis a little forward? How might that happen? Again, it might move a millimeter, if that. Just a tiny little suggestion of that your pelvis could move back forward and then back in the direction that you're turned. Your shoulders are relaxed, your breathing is even and steady. Great. And then let that go. Turn yourself all the way forward again. Come forward and face forward and close your eyes for a moment. And just sense yourself standing here. Notice if you've experienced a difference between your two sides now, if one side's bigger, clearer. And then open your eyes again and turn that same way back to look behind you and see, how does this go now? Go 2 or 3 times, come back to the front and turn this way and feel, did you gain some fluidity of movement, some ease, some range in turning? You can maybe see farther behind you more effortlessly. Then you can start to go a little side to side, turn this way to look behind you, turn the other way to look behind you, and find how you can make this playful kind of dance, easy, smooth, comfortable, and enjoy how all these parts of you can participate in this movement. Great. And then the next time you're facing forward, just pause. Notice yourself in standing here now. If you'd like to close your eyes once more, see what's different. Perhaps there's a different quality to your presence, the how much of you is actually here now, what you're sensing. Maybe your feet are more obvious, your weight in your legs. And just take a little walk and notice yourself in walking and feel if there's some quality to your walking that's maybe a little new, a little different. And when you've explored that, come on back. And what did you notice? Anybody have a big or little aha or change, insight?
I had a really incredible change. It was very subtle, but when I turned the way that was not natural for me, at first my feet kept coming off the ground, as I turned. But after going through the process, the last time I turned to look, my feet felt completely grounded to the floor.
Nice, nice. Great. Anything else?
When I noticed my feet initially standing, it felt as if my legs were standing, like imagine a block letter A. And my left leg was a full block and my right leg was just the skinny side of the block letter. And then by the time I did it again, then I had two block legs. They were equally filled.
Fascinating. Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it, how attending to ourselves like this in movement can affect such a significant change in 5 minutes. It's really quite extraordinary. And this speaks to this capacity we have for neuroplasticity, that our brains are constantly refining and changing and mapping and remapping. And yeah, I'm curious if there's anything else anyone wanted to share, or yes, Robert.
Definitely more range of movement to the right all of a sudden, and then more anchoring with the feet. I felt that my knees were responding a bit more. Yeah, definitely.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, Feldenkrais lessons are such a wonderful experience of sort of disrupting our habitual patterns. So often we'll work with the movement of the eyes in relation to the head, or the head in relation to the shoulders, because these patterns get so wired in our day-to-day activities, where normally we're moving our eyes with our head with our shoulders, and a little bit of disrupting the pattern opens up the possibility for our nervous system to find more ease, more refinement, more options, essentially, through movement. And yeah, this speaks to our bringing awareness to these habits and patterns, and how key moving with awareness is, because if we're doing repetitive movement without attending to ourselves, the impact is we may still experience some increased range of motion or some increased strength or something, but not nearly the sort of neuroplastic capacity that we tap into when we're attending to ourselves as we move.
Would you like to give folks a little explanation for neuroplasticities, so at least we can understand it from your point of view? Or maybe some people don't know about it too much, but I think everyone here does.
Thank you. It seems like everyone I met at least knows about it. Actually, Norman Deutsch gave this very sort of bare bones, practical description here. Neuroplasticity is the property of the brain that enables it to change its own structure and functioning in response to activity and mental experience. We spoke yesterday about, thank goodness, our nervous system creates these patterns and habits, because I don't know about you all, but I learned to drive on a stick shift car in rural Maine. And the first few attempts, I thought, how does anybody drive? I mean, it seemed impossible. All of these things that I was trying to attend to at once, coordinating my feet, coordinating my hands and arms, looking at everything around me. And of course, after a few weeks, maybe a month or something, I was able to drink coffee and talk to my friends, listen to the radio. It was before cell phones, thank goodness. But, you know, it became something that just happened in the background, much as standing and walking and so much of our day-to-day activities. So our nervous system creates these patterns so that we can function in the world. Unfortunately, some of the habits and patterns we develop, while they may have served a purpose at a certain time, start to interfere with our capacity for freedom and ease and choice. Moshe Feldenkrais understood that to really be free as a human being, we have to have choice. And at the most fundamental level, in our actions, in our thoughts, in our feelings. If we only have this rutted habit and pattern of moving, thinking, and feeling, we're compulsive, and compulsivity leads to problems. So, and he said 2 options, still not really choice, it's either or. So broadening our options in movement, in thinking and feeling, which of course we talk about as though we can address them separately, but they're all one in our being. So, yeah.
I love the way that science is now coming to understand, cutting edge science, that it's the mind that's guiding the brain. Before, and I think still in a lot of old school science, anything that we would call consciousness is simply a derivative of what's happening with the brain. Whereas when we really take a look at neuroplasticity, and we look at it, for example, from Moshe's point of view, the mind is actually directing the brain and causing the brain to do different things than it was doing before. It's changing like patterns and shapes and all kinds of things according to how the mind determines that the brain should be used. And I think that's such a freeing concept. But tell us a little bit more about, if you would, the interaction between moving and our consciousness, how we're thinking, how we're feeling. Tell us a little more about that from a Feldenkrais perspective.
Yeah, again, everything is connected in us, right? And Moshe Feldenkrais understood that our self-image is of primary importance, and our self-image is a combination of our genetic inheritance, our upbringing, our education. So to a certain point, you know, what was sort of imposed or offered to us, not by our choosing, and then ultimately how we choose to educate ourselves when we have the choice. But these patterns that are laid deeply in our being, that make up this self-image, is really determining how we act and how we are in the world. We act in accordance with our self-image, he wrote. And So the posture, the physical posture that we have, the ways that we move in the world are part and parcel of the way we think and the way we feel, the way we sense ourselves. And the more we open to different possibilities in the ways that we move, think, and feel, the more we expand all possibilities. So I was going to say the more we expand our consciousness, and I'm trying to decide if that's what I want to say. I think that might be what I want to say. We are being recorded. I don't know. The more we open, the more openness we have. I mean, this is my experience as someone, again, with a ballet background and very sort of all kinds of things. As this Feldenkrais practice has developed in me, as I've developed this practice, and this practice has sort of evolved with me, I'm much less black and white in my thinking. I'm much more sort of aware of so much more in my surroundings, my environment. I have so much more of a sense of agency, capacity, peace, ease. I tell you, to agree to do something like this 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have been a nervous wreck. And what have I, preparing for hours and, this kind of thing, where today I feel like the intention of showing up and being present and sharing what I'm excited about and what I've learned and what my experience is, I feel free to do this in a way that I didn't before. And the way I interpret that is that my consciousness is sort of expanding and opening, and I'm maturing. Actually, Feldenkrais used the term maturity as, as we become more fully human. That's what it means to mature as a human being. So,
Oh, that's so beautiful.
yeah, David.
Oh, you said so many great things. I'm gonna have to catch up here. Well, the thing you hit upon that I really loved and I want to explore with you, if you would, is this notion about compulsion. What I wrote down was compulsion equals no choice. It's like we're guided by habit or something that we planted, and it may or may not be appropriate with what's really happening right now, which is the only place choice can occur. And so this notion of, I thought about, if you just leave, I hate that word ego, but maybe leave personality out of it. Leave those stories that you developed through your life, and leaving those aside so that you can be more in with what's really happening right here.
What comes to me as you're speaking is this, there's so much important research and awareness around trauma and the effects of trauma, and so much compulsive behavior, I think, can be, maybe the roots of them are deep in history of coping strategies that we developed early on in response to experiences of trauma or, something traumatic. And those coping strategies saved us, served us well, and then become problematic when they've outlived their usefulness. So the ability in trauma work, also the ability to come into our bodies and be fully present and have the experience of safety within ourselves is hugely important in this practice of learning how to expand our options in the world. And Feldenkrais, Renee wrote a little bit about his history. He was born in Russia in what is now Ukraine, a Jew, and his family suffered terribly at the hands of the Russian pogroms. And his life story is extraordinary. Renee said, I'm involved with a colleague in putting together a documentary about him and his work, because it's the the example he provides as a human being who suffered horrible trauma in his lifetime, who could easily have been completely taken down by this, paralyzed by this, dysfunctional in his life, and actually came to this place of not just surviving, but really thriving. And the wisdom that he tapped into through science and also through martial arts and through the heritage of his religion and his family and awareness and service and all of these threads that came together that helped him thrive and put together this extraordinary method to help others thrive as well. Really key. And being able to come into the present and feel safe in our bodies is a fundamental component to that learning practice, definitely. Hi, Noah.
Yeah, as you're speaking about trauma, it strikes me that like every form of somatic psychotherapy that addresses trauma is really about somatic re-education and neurological re-education. But one of the things that I really appreciate a lot about Feldenkrais, I've been doing it for just under 2 years, is that it actually talks about it as education and sort of that the importance of that framing, you know, and to me, it's like if you look at that framing as this is about learning, it's about education, and it becomes so incredibly obvious that we have neuroplasticity because of course we keep learning, of course we keep changing and growing throughout our lives, not just until the age of 14, right? But it's taken the scientists a really long time to figure this out. And part of it is just because the framing was not about education and learning. So I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit to that framing and that way of speaking that I hear in Feldenkrais about, you know, somatic education.
Absolutely. Thank you for, yeah, that's wonderful. I'm so glad you brought that up. Feldenkrais was adamant that he wasn't curing people. He wasn't fixing people, that there's this innate intelligence we all have, and it's a matter of creating the conditions for learning to happen. And that, yes, learning is a very different framework than there's something wrong with me, I have to go, you know, find someone to fix it. That sense of agency that we have the capacity within ourselves. And that little lesson example that I gave is a wonderful example of how without what, you know, when we go through that process of sort of unwinding our habitual patterns and then just let go of the control, and the nervous system actually can produce the most efficient combination of movements. It's not this like we need to think about it and put the pieces together, and our nervous systems are so much smarter than our intellects are, but we've come to really worship intellect. And as Renee, you were pointing out, we're appreciating the limits of what we can know with our intellect, and how much, you know, deeper, broader the wisdom is. But yeah, Noah, thanks for bringing that up, because somatic re-education is so much more accurate to what it is that we're doing with the Feldenkrais method, with these other somatic education practices. So yeah, I hope that addressed that sufficiently.
Robert, do you want to comment on any of these as we're rolling along? I want to make sure that you feel free. This is a conversation.
Please do. Yes.
Yes, thank you. I'm always impressed about Moshe, that he came about all these things in such ahead of his time, and you know, thinking that people thought he was actually, you know, a quack when he came with these ideas. And now that we're studying neurosciences, and that it's, you know, what everything was saying was actually true. So it's very amazing. And coming back to neuroplasticity, what's also interesting is that in the process of doing something, the benefits of errors, making errors and learning from those errors, for me, is also quite important. Yes. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, thanks for that. That reminds me actually of, I heard someone say recently, and I haven't gone and researched this, but please correct me, the doctors in the house, if it's not accurate, but that actually in moments of confusion, in moments of sort of that, when your brain kind of goes, like, wait, what's happening here? That's when the chemicals are released,
Exactly.
the chemicals of neuroplasticity. So we think we need to not make mistakes. We think we need to know how to do something before we even try it for the first time so that we don't make mistakes. No, 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 no. By making mistakes is how we learn. And if we don't, you know, you watch an infant learn how to roll over and sit and stand and walk, it's not because someone is standing there saying, do this, do this, do this, you know, it's trial and error and falling and getting back up. And that's the kind of learning we're wanting to reconnect with in Feldenkrais, is that organic, innate learning capacity.
I want to call on Malia, and I want to comment before I do so in response to what you just mentioned, the two of you, about quote unquote mistakes. I know that when I'm leading Nia, which is a dance-like format, and I suddenly do something that I was not part of my planned choreography, I often will go, why did my body do that? I'm not really sure, but that was kind of cool. And then sometimes that actually becomes a new piece of the choreography. It was like this body discovery that I felt fortunate enough to be aware of, didn't label it a mistake, instead called it, oh, something new. So I don't know whether, Malia, when you're in the process of choreographing in hula, if you ever have that same kind of phenomenon. And I also want to honor whatever question you want to ask, and we'll call on Carol Ann after that.
Oh, mahalo nui. Yeah, I think that the choreography process is full of those kinds of moments. And thank you so much for mentioning that moment of confusion. I feel so supported right now because I have those moments of confusion like all the time. Particularly teaching through Zoom, where I choose to mirror all of my dances. And there are times where my mirror ability just goes faulty. And I'm like, oh. Which way is right and which way is left, and I do cherish those moments. I had a major concussion just about a year ago, and for the brain to have the ability to just work, it's a miracle. But my question actually was, I was curious about specifically awareness through movement and this idea of awareness. And in hula, there's this idea that the highest level of hula is when the dancer ceases to be a dancer and then becomes the element. So if we're dancing about the rain or the mountains or the volcano, that the highest level of dancing is almost this release of awareness, this release of this letting go of awareness. And so I think you spoke a little bit to that when you mentioned letting go of control. And so I was just curious if you could speak a little bit more about maybe stages beyond awareness through movement. And I think another clue to this is from Robert. He gave me my theme for the entire year, early on in the year. Yes, you quoted Moshe Feldenkrais, and you said to make the impossible possible, the possible easy, and the easy elegant. And so I'm wondering if there might be just anything you can add about the awareness and then the lack of awareness.
Wow. Well, yeah, that's such a beautiful quote, and it speaks to that no matter where we are, there's always improvement possible, right? If something feels impossible, it can become possible. If it feels possible, it can become easier. If it's already easy, we can still refine it and make it elegant and beautiful. And boy, what comes for me, Malia, when you ask that is, my husband's actually a poet, and we were just talking the other day about these activities. He teaches poetry as spiritual practice, and engaging with poetry, not through the intellect, but through in a somatic way. It's really experiencing poetry. And there's, which I wonder if this is what you're speaking to in hula, there's this sense of an experience of integration that's so deeply satisfying that I think, and this is a nod to, I don't know if you know Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary, this extraordinary book about left-right hemisphere and how the world, our world has become very left hemisphere dominant. The intellect, control, decontextualizing things, black and white thinking, the left hemisphere, which is so vitally important in helping us communicate, use language, and have concepts and everything, has kind of run amok and become kind of the end all and be all, it thinks, when in fact it's in service to the whole, which is the right hemisphere, which sees context and knows complexity and knows nuance and intuition and all of these things. And there's this, why I think find Feldenkrais lessons and practice so satisfying is there's this sense that I'm becoming a more complete human being. Like I'm integrating the very detail-oriented, my left foot is doing this and I'm sensing this movement in my ankle with this experience of the whole of myself. And it's almost like, not like I disappear, but it's like this, well, and David spoke to, like the ego is just completely in the back seat. It becomes not about that at all. It becomes about this very present sort of big picture with detail and all the sensation, this incredibly rich experience, which is profoundly satisfying. And empowering somehow. So yeah, that's what comes for me when you speak to the dancer. I forget how you named it so beautifully, but the dancer sort of becoming or disappearing in it and becoming the element.
Thank you so much for that. And the activity you led us through, I think now thinking back on it really illustrates that. When I first turned my head to the natural way that I normally do to the right, after we were staying for a moment with our eyes closed, my body kept wanting to twist that way. It just kept wanting to twist. And after we had gone the other way and did the exercise with the eyes, that final moment of closing the eyes and checking in, I felt completely centered with no inclination or pull to twist in either direction. And that word integration, I think, really describes that. So thank you so much.
Well, yeah, you're so welcome. Thank you.
Carol Ann, are you ready? I know we made you wait a while.
That's okay. This was one of my favorite talks in regards to neuroplasticity. And it was so neat to see this idea that I'm cultivating on a trauma survivor's ability to be exposed to a trauma and develop a different response, even to very severe, violent traumas that are really difficult for patients to move past. One specific thing that came to mind in moving through the Feldenkrais in this reteaching body movement, feeling things without focusing on feeling them, and allowing that passivity and for things to move through you, not from you. I remember Renee telling me that our children come through us, not from us. And that keeps playing over, that there can be motion and movement to our body that comes through us, not from us. And in this reteaching pattern, I relate that so much to this relearning very fundamental things that can translate into profound psychological changes for myself. There is this idea that I'm developing about the brain as a computer, and neuroplasticity is the ability to, have neurological changes with effort, with conscious effort being put into it. And so if you look at your brain like a computer, that means that you have all the faculties and all the hardware, and it's just about updating your hard drive. It's about rewriting your programs, because everything is already beautifully there as a human being. You have it all within you. And so I remember going to lunch with you, Renee, when I came and visited and did my talk about Are We Our Bodies? And I don't know if you remember me telling you the story about the loud bang. I do equine therapy as a trauma therapy. And I was at our ranch with my therapist, who's a LMFT, and I have gun trauma. I survived. That was one of my assassination attempts, was by gun violence. And so if I heard a loud bang, I would start sweating profusely. My heart would race. I would even go so far as my blood sugar would drop because I'm a hyperglycemia patient. And it sometimes have gone non-responsive as a stress response to this noise. And I had to decide if I was going to live the rest of my life like having these repeat episodes that endangered me, or if I was going to figure out a way to rewrite that hard drive. And there was an incident, I heard a bang, I was with her, and we both laughed about it because she jumped too. And the next time I heard a bang, what I noticed was I flashed to the memory of my therapist and I laughing because she jumped at this loud noise too. And I realized that there was a way to expose myself to things in a safe way, in a controlled environment, that gave me an opportunity to give myself a new memory for a trauma trigger. And by giving myself new memories to trauma triggers, I have been able to get myself out of the house more in this conscious movement with Feldenkrais, where you're magically moving through what your brain already knows how to do, but inspiring it to do its own job. Thank you, Alice.
Thank you. Thanks, Caroline. Yeah, that's beautiful. I appreciate you sharing. And what comes up for me is thinking, for this, Feldenkrais really opened my eyes to how the way I learned to affect change was to apply will and force, to will my way to make a change, to sort of force change to happen. And what I love about Feldenkrais is that awareness, that understanding that in fact, sort of applying force and will actually strengthens the pattern, because what we resist persists, some wise person said, right? And so to unwind the pattern actually requires just the opposite: more ease, more really slowing down, really, attending carefully, and allowing, more allowing than willing and forcing. And that's hugely valuable. And absolutely, the idea of sort of updating the software, rewriting the hard drive is an apt metaphor for sure. It's complex.
had a couple of comments. There's so many interesting things that you said that resonated with me, and then one question. First of all, about confusion. You know the two lions when you go into a library, there's lions on each side. Those are the lions of confusion. And the idea, yeah, patience and perseverance, the lions of confusion, because confusion is the step immediately preceding knowledge. So it's kind of a get confused, get everything out of your head. Now you're ready to learn something.
Wonderful.
And the other thing I was thinking about when you were talking about left brain, right brain, it just seems to me that we're also in a period now where you could make it yin and yang. You could make it masculine and feminine. And we have had about 5,000 years of domination with the masculine. And it's brought us to where we are now. And we're just freeing up the feminine to be its own person, to be respected. And it just fits in with almost the same time period with Feldenkrais and his idea. And my understanding of Feldenkrais, when I just had a little bit of this many, many years ago, was it's very gentle. And that there's a lot of massage kind of movement that's just with a couple of fingers and just a very gentle kind of thing. And so that kind of fits in with that idea too of the receptive and the feminine. But I wanted to ask you, I've done a lot of Rolfing. And in fact, my lady friend, I just introduced her to it with a wonderful Rolfer downtown. And she's getting enormous physical and psychological benefits out of it. And it seemed to me that Rolfing is it's hitting on the same thing as Feldenkrais, but it's coming from almost the exact opposite direction, you know, where you dig this deep tissue massage and you get right into it instead of just, doing it gently and letting it evolve. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about that and just the whole idea of maybe there's different ways to approach the same thing or just what you thought about it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Roger. I appreciate that question. I've not experienced Rolfing myself. I know several people who've described their experience to me. And interestingly, Ida Rolf and Moshe Feldenkrais knew each other and were colleagues and highly respected each other's work. And they came to, I think Ida Rolf actually came up with structural integration before Moshe came up with functional integration. But it was like the intentions were the same, or not that there are goals, but sort of the ideas were the same, but they disagreed in the best path there. And Feldenkrais, when you mention, gentle couple finger massage like work, the whole, again, a scientist and the method very rooted in his knowledge and awareness and wisdom as a scientist, the idea that this principle, the Weber-Fechner principle you may have heard of, which is that the greater the stimulus we're experiencing, the greater the increase in stimulus needs to be for us to detect a change. So you think about if you're in a brightly lit room and I light a candle in the middle of the room, you won't be able to detect the difference in the light. If the room is pitch black and I light a candle in the middle of the room, it will light up the whole room. If you're carrying a piano and a fly lands on it, you won't feel it. If you're carrying a feather and a fly lands on it, you will. And this is the principle that Feldenkrais uses in his work, that we're really reducing effort, we're slowing down, we're decreasing the range of movement, we're decreasing the effort so that we can get more and more refined in our ability to perceive differences, because that's how the brain learns. One of these quotes mentions that the brain is designed to make discriminations. That's why we use sort of compare your left and right sides also, so that we can really start to develop our awareness in that way.
So there's so many great things going on here. So Roger, one of the food dogs has his hand up. They have One is paradox, the other is confusion, and you have to pass through both to reach the temple where the truth resides. Just an update on that. And Carol Ann, in computer architecture, there are multiple layers. Be happy to talk. I think what we're talking about now is what we call a firmware update. It's a bit of software, but it's embedded right in the hardware itself. And if we can change things at that level, they play out through, we change it in here, little tiny changes here, play out in big changes out here. And so something that I've stumbled upon, and I think this idea of learning that you just mentioned, Alice, was that learning is that putting together, making new connections. And reflecting back to the very beginning of your talk, that Thich Nhat Hanh said, the Sangha is the next Buddha, and it is these connections. Life is learning from us. One thing that I stumbled upon, and I'd love to hear your reflection on it, is I heard a yoga teacher here one time say, prana is intelligent. And it just blew my mind in light of also at the same time listening to Shamaraja, the sage that says that divinity, the self, and awareness are all words for the same thing. And so as we move awareness, we're moving prana, and prana goes to wherever our attention turns. And it's having an intelligence. If it's too tight, it's going to loosen it up. And if it's weak, it's going to bring strength to it. And I wonder if you could reflect upon that.
Yeah, I mean, I do. There is this quality of, being able to direct breath, life force, awareness. I don't know that I can speak to that very eloquently. I think what you named already is important, but what caught my attention and what you said is paradox. And Moshe Feldenkrais also, through his Hasidic roots, there's a wonderful book titled Making Connections about Moshe's Hasidic roots and how they influenced his the method, him and the method. But this idea of that the world is paradox, right? And it's so anathema to us. It makes us so uncomfortable, maybe just me, I don't know. But the brain, the mind seems to want to gravitate toward right, wrong, good, bad, this, that. And holding paradox is one way to sort of loosen that grip. So I love it that paradox and confusion we have to pass through to access truth. Amen to that.
I really enjoyed reading about that link that was on the email about Moshe's life and his background as a martial artist. And what was interesting for me was the thing that I learned and have taught is how to win without fighting. And to do that is to take advantage of a natural resistance that we all have. So when we consider who we are and ourself in that sense, we filter everything that is not what we perceive to be us in terms of our identity, and that speaks to ego as well. So think of the fact that change, evolution, impermanence, those are all constant laws that govern us. And so in that sense, I came up with this bumper sticker, the new bumper sticker, okay, after listening to this. And if you consider the I, which is sort of the resistant to change, the resistant to basically accept, this evolution or learning. And we're made up of billions of cells, okay? The single neuron being neuroplastic, or having the ability to change, gives me this. You got it?
The neuron is greater than I.
Yeah. So that's my contribution.
Right. Beautiful. I love incorporating visual elements also, integrating that. Definitely. The more parts of the brain we involve in learning, also the deeper the learning goes, which is why at the end of a Feldenkrais lesson, we'll often, see if an image comes or a phrase, some adjective descriptor for the state that you're in, because adding language onto experience helps it sort of deepen in our experience, in our learning. So cool.
Yes, wonderful. Well, Lynn, you're the only person that we really haven't heard from yet, and I wonder if you might like to share something and maybe even give what we call in GEMS a vote of thanks to our speaker, Alice. If there's anything, a word of it.
Well, I would definitely appreciate Alice. Unfortunately, I did not arrive before her speech. So I took her class this morning, and then I came to the studio to do Marla's Aldoa workshop, and just got home in time to tune back in. But I truly do appreciate what I've heard since, because it all applied that I did 10 years of Rolfing. I did probably 30 years of yoga, and really appreciate that's what I loved about Nia. It's like, oh my God, this incorporates everything. But I think my appreciation for Feldenkrais really comes down to ease. That the more I surrender and let go and stop resisting and just tune in, just the natural flows begin, and it's amazing. But I don't think I would have felt it if I hadn't done the other practices first, as clearly.
Well, I think actually, if I were to say anything about what you've just said, Lynn, in regard to our whole experience today, was a sense of ease that Alice delivered to us this beautiful presentation in a very easy to digest kind of way. I felt as if she was at ease, and she even commented that as opposed to the way she would have prepared prior to Feldenkrais and been very uptight about having this event about to happen, she just took it in stride. And so I think that sense of ease is something that she has shown us how to do. She has allowed us to feel, to experience, and also it created great ease in terms of everyone's ability to interact today as a Sangha, learning together. So really a very beautiful experience for all of us. Alice, thank you so much. Robert, thank you for adding in. We're so glad that you are here as well.
I just want to say thank you to everyone so much for being here and your wonderful comments and questions. And I feel very welcomed into this wonderful community you've created together. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mahalo.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Mahalo.
Thanks so much. Thanks, David.
Yeah.
Thanks, Renee. Beautiful
Yes.
gathering.